morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for Science on Tap Minocqua. My name is Carol Warden. I work at UW Trout Lake Station. Science on Tap is an example of the Wisconsin idea, an idea conceived in 1905 that the borders of the university are the borders of the state. Our partners in Science on Tap include Rocky Reef Brewing. Thank you very much for hosting. The Lakeland chapter of the Wisconsin Alumni Association, UW Kemp Natural Resources Station, UW Trout Lake Station, Minocqua Public Library, and WXPR Radio. Science on Tap is supported through a grant from the Brittingham Fund to the University of Wisconsin. There are 3 ways to watch. You can join us here in person, so thank you all for coming. Packed house tonight. You can watch on YouTube live. So when you watch on YouTube, you can ask questions in the comments box, and they will come to us here. And there's also a link for the YouTube page on our Science on Tap website. You can also watch these events later. So we do record them and we archive them, so you can go to our website and check any out that you may have missed in the past. Our next event will be here on Thursday, April 2nd at 6:30. And we'll be hearing from Jeff Wilson about all things wildlife. So he'll be talking about ospreys, loons, bears, beavers, you name it. So hopefully we'll see you all here then. And we also have an event, Kemp Natural Resources Station will have an open house on Saturday, April 11th. And they will be collecting, boiling, and bottling Kemp Gold maple syrup. And they have more details on their website for that. Okay, tonight, we have 2 speakers, as you can see. We have Ron Eckstein and Tom Hiddle discussing forests at risk. So prior to retiring after 38 years with Steigerwalt Land Services, a Wisconsin-based forestry and real estate consulting business, Tom held several positions with responsibilities for land and resource management, project coordination and client services, forestry and GIS operations, and real estate appraisal services. Tom was responsible for management of over 350,000 acres of client-owned timberland and gained a wide range of expertise in forest management and timberland real estate from years of hands-on consulting and forest management efforts on small and large private forest lands and for county, state, federal, tribal, utility, investment, and conservancy clients. Tom's experience includes due diligence for timberland acquisitions, resource analysis and forest management planning, system development and implementation, and management scenario modeling on a variety of consulting projects. Maybe we'll learn about what all that means. Tom was appointed in 2013 by Governor Walker to serve as the Wisconsin Council on the Wisconsin Council of Forestry, and in 2019 appointed to his current position as the chair of the council by Governor Evers. He served as state chair for the Wisconsin Society of American Foresters, SAF, and state chair for the Wisconsin chapter of the Association of Consulting Foresters. Tom is an SAF fellow, recognized as an SAF member for longstanding services to forestry at the local, state, and national level, and as an ambassador for the advancement of forestry. He earned his Bachelor of Science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Ron Eckstein here served as Wisconsin Green Fire's board secretary from its inception through 2020. He co-chairs the Public Lands and Forestry Work Group. Ron earned his Bachelor of Science and Master of Science in Wildlife Ecology at UW-Madison and is retired from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources after 36 years as a wildlife biologist in Rhinelander. He worked on wildlife forest habitat issues, including forest biodiversity, and specialized in bald eagle, osprey, and wild rice conservation. Ron serves on the board of the Northwoods Land Trust and chairs the Wisconsin chapter of the Wildlife Society's Wildlife and Forest Conservation Affairs Committee. He serves on the Wisconsin DNR's Silviculture Guidance Team, Wisconsin Initiative for Climate Impacts on Forestry Team, and the Council on Forestry's Sound Forestry Team. Ron makes sure wildlife habitat and forest biodiversity is included in land and forest management decisions. He and his wife Jan live near Rhinelander and enjoy hiking, biking, paddling, cross-country skiing, and all things Lake Superior. So per tradition, we have trivia about Ron and Tom, and it's double the fun tonight since we have 2 speakers. So first, Tom. Most self-respecting foresters won't admit to being momentarily unsure of where they are when they're out and about, or in more basic terms, being lost. Tom decided to forego his self-pride tonight to offer this personal trivia question. So, keeping in mind that many of Tom's adventures were before the advent of GPS technology, we kept your young-looking photo on our poster. So here's the question. Where was Tom's most upsetting experience being momentarily spatially disoriented? A, canoeing in Quetico Provincial Park in Canada. So many bays and islands that all look the same. B, during forest property inspections in rural Texas. Pretty scary, don't want to stop and ask for directions there. Or C, looking for the car after a Badger hockey game when they played at the old Coliseum. So we have A, canoeing in Quetico, B, Texas, C, a Badger game. Go Badgers! And for Ron, in 1988, Ron was sitting in his office at the DNR in Rhinelander at the ranger station when a radio message indicated there was a wildfire at a state wildlife area. He jumped in his truck as fast as he could and headed out with the red lights and siren going. What happened next? He arrived at the scene but forgot all of his firefighting gear. He arrived but tried to stop the firefighters from actually putting the fire out. Or C, he arrived at the wrong wildlife area. So A, forgot the firefighting gear, B, stopped the firefighters, or C, wrong wildlife area. It's B. And the rest of the story is he arrived at the right one, Thunder Lake Marsh, near the village of Three Lakes, to encourage the firefighters to let the fire burn because they use prescribed fire to manage those extensive peatlands. And now, Ron and Tom.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I mean, everybody. Holy cow. I hope you can breathe out there. I wrote my script. Normally, the audience here is just a bunch of normal people. But I understand that the Society of American Foresters had a section meeting nearby, and they're full of professional foresters out there. So, holy cow. I don't want to talk down to the foresters, but there are credits you can get for the foresters out there if you listen to this thing. So I'm a retired wildlife biologist, and I volunteer with Wisconsin's Green Fire for 6 years now. Wisconsin's Green Fire supports our conservation legacy by promoting science-based management and natural resources. Most of our work is done by specialist volunteers who had long careers in natural resources management. We have work groups within Green Fire focused on a variety of issues. There's one for wildlife, public lands and forestry, which I chair, the wetlands group, the water quality, sustainable agriculture, climate, contaminants, and education. Today we'll talk about forests and forestry and a report we did about a year and a half ago called Forests at Risk, Engaging Wisconsinites in Another Century of Forest Conservation. The main author was Fred Clark. Many of you know Fred Clark. Fred has over 30 years experience in forest management and conservation. We put together a 10-member team that developed the paper. It includes wildlife biologists and foresters and forest ecologists from private, state, federal, university, and tribal interests. So 100 years ago, in the 1920s, Wisconsin's forests were in poor shape. It was the end of the big cutover, and huge wildfires burned across millions of acres of the North Woods. North Woods agriculture was struggling. However, in the mid to late 1920s, 100 years ago, Wisconsin citizens took action. They established the county, state, and national forest systems, controlled wildfire, began planting trees, and began to focus on forests rather than agriculture in the North Woods. And the forests recovered. Today, 100 years later, forests are again facing risks. Our team identified a number of risks, and here are 10 of them. Forest simplification, the reduced composition of tree species and structural diversity in forests. Number 2, forest fragmentation, forests divided into smaller and smaller fragments, especially in central and southern Wisconsin. Parcelization, more and more people own smaller and smaller forest tracts. Number 4, a wave of new insect pests, pathogens, and invasive plants. Number 5, deer browsing. Number 6, the impacts of a rapidly changing climate. Number 7, little public knowledge of forest ecology and forest management. Number 8, unstable conditions and unstable conditions and markets for the forest products industry. Number 9, the price of rural forest land far exceeds the value of the timber on the land. And the lack of funding to address forest conservation issues in all of the public lands and private land people who own forests. So we can no longer assume that Wisconsin forests will continue to predictably and consistently provide economic, environmental, and social benefits into the future. A little bit about Wisconsin forests. About 40% of the state is forested. That's about 17 million acres. Private landowners own about 70% of the forests. Public landowners own about 30%. For the private landowners, it varies from people who own just a few acres to giant timber investment management organizations, TIMOs, that own tens of thousands of acres. For the public lands, it's divided, again, 30% are public lands, and taken together, the county forest system has 2.4 million acres in 29 counties. The Squamish-Nicolet National Forest, 1.5 million acres. The DNR's state forest system has about 500,000 acres. And the remaining public land forests are divided among local parks, state wildlife areas, federal wildlife refuges, Apostle Islands National Lakeshore. A little bit on the age of forests from an ecological perspective, not a timber management perspective. From an ecological perspective, about 30% of all the state's forests in the state are relatively young, less than 60 years old. About 60% of the state's forests are middle-aged, 60 to 90 years old. Only about 8% are older than 100 years, 100 to 120 years, and only about 2%, or a little bit less, are considered old-growth forests, older than 150 years. A little bit about wildlife, because I'm a wildlife biologist. There are about 350 species of terrestrial vertebrates that live in Wisconsin's forests and needed for habitat, including birds, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. In order to conserve these 350 wildlife species, forest habitats must range from very young open canopy forests to very old closed canopy forests. These forests must have high tree species diversity and complex forest structure. Looking at the trees, about 45 species of native trees in Wisconsin forests, forest trees. And the question is, how much sun do these trees need to reproduce and regenerate? More than half of Wisconsin's tree species need 50 to 90% sun to grow and regenerate. Less than half can regenerate in partial sun or full shade. So this suggests that we need the full range of conditions throughout Wisconsin, from sun to shade, for forests and wildlife to thrive. And next, Thomas.
All right. Good evening, everybody.
This guy's drunk.
Good evening. Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Carol, for the introduction. And thank you all for being here this evening. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces, although it's a little bit intimidating because I see faces that I think know a lot more about the subject than I'm up here to talk about. So give me a little bit of slack there. But anyway, again, appreciate the opportunity to be here. Appreciate Wisconsin Green Fire's efforts to put the Wisconsin Forests at Risk paper together. Appreciate the sponsors of Science on Tap and Rocky Reef Brewing Company for hosting us here this evening. I have to tell you, I don't think I've ever had an opportunity to present or speak to a crowd where I've been able to sit and have a malt beverage at the same time.
That's right.
So this has set a new bar for my expectations with regards to public speaking events, which is always good. So we recognize that there's more than enough things to worry about in today's world. On a daily basis, there's something new to fill your worry box, right? So we're very cautious of overloading that. But to be very straightforward, and I think Ron has alluded to this, there's a strong feeling across the forestry community that engaging in discussions about our forests and engaging in understanding the risks that our forests are facing, new risks that are compounding, is really crucial for the future planning and the future stewardship of our forest resources. And that, in part, is the genesis behind the Wisconsin Green Fire paper. When Fred called me, I was very happy to be considered to be on part of that team and contribute to that, because I think this is a very important message. I'm super proud to have been part of the forestry community here in Wisconsin for the last 40 years. It's a great community of foresters and natural resource professionals, ologists, like wildlife biologists, landowners, and others. And I will tell you all, it is the best community that I have come across to be part of. It's a community that has been in Wisconsin and active here for more than 100 years. And we sit here in 2026 enjoying the benefits of what those who came before us did as stewards of our forest lands. And I'm hopeful that 40 or 60 or 100 years, when people gather back at Rocky Reef Brewery, it's a little bit larger, but also hopeful that they look back at us in this period and say, we're thankful that they did what they did so that we could enjoy the 17 million acres of forest resources that are in our state. So Ron and I have a couple of questions before we flip things around and let you ask us questions. We thought that was maybe fair, right? So we've got a couple of questions to ask you, and we want very much this to be a discussion, not a presentation. Obviously, no PowerPoints tonight. We're not going to do that. So we want to ask a couple of questions relative to the Forest at Risk topic. And that'll give Ron and I think, a little bit of a chance to dive a little bit deeper into those topics. And then maybe it will generate some thoughts from all of you with regards to questions that you can ask when we get to that section. So, are we good?
Good.
We're good. Okay. So, first question for you. This is true and false. Pretty straightforward. You got 50-50 chance. True or false? Invasive plant species and climate change are two stress factors impacting forest health statewide.
True.
Pretty much of a softball, right? We got that one? All right. All right. Good. You're off to a good start.
It's easy.
I don't know if they're going to get harder, but anyway. So, yeah, invasive plant species and climate change. So let's talk about invasive plant species and plant species for just a minute. So I think everybody's familiar with what's been happening with our ash forest. So emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer is an invasive pest. We're going to lose more than 90% of our ash trees in Wisconsin. It's inevitable. There's nothing that we can do to prevent that. Looking back historically, if you're familiar with oak wilt, if you're familiar with Dutch elm disease, invasive pests from outside of North America. And we have the hemlock woolly adelgid knocking at our door, and we're doing the very best we can to hold that back?
Knocking on their door, it's devastated forest up and down the Appalachian Mountains, throughout Pennsylvania. It's up into Maine. It's in Michigan on the east side of Lake Michigan. It's a tiny thing. It can blow with the wind. So you get the right wind and it's going to blow across Lake Michigan and be in Wisconsin, I imagine, 10 years from now for sure. And there's no known, just like emerald ash borer, there's nothing we can do. It just kills most hemlock trees. So that's a serious pest on the horizon, and we always encourage the State Department of Natural Resources to prepare funding and staffing because it's going to come and we need to address it.
Thanks, Ron. So climate, so historically, over the grander period, our forests are able to adapt to changes in climate and other stresses that occur. What's happening now is it's happening much more rapidly than our forests can naturally adjust to. The natural migration of forests moving in one direction or another as climate changes has happened, going all the way back to the Ice Age, correctly? So, but what's happening now is just happening so rapid that our forests can't adapt to that. Climate challenges to our forests and our trees puts additional stress on our trees. They're less likely to be able to prevent themselves from being damaged by things like invasive species. The trees are just like us. When our immune systems are stressed, we're more susceptible to other stresses that occur. So it's a compounding effect, and all of the stresses that we're seeing out there are compounding. So while we might be able to get through an individual pest outbreak, or we might be able to get through a season or two of climate change or stress or drought or excessive rain, when we combine all of that, it's a real challenge for our forests.
Yeah, and it's for many things in forestry and ecology, it's not so much that there's a change, but the rate of change is what the killer is. So, the climate is changing just very, very fast for both plants and animals to adapt readily. We're lucky in Wisconsin because we're so close to the glacier. Glacier was right here 11,000 years ago with ice. So plants and animals only had about 11,000 years to invade and form alliances with each other and produce good results. And so when we disturb our forests with management, it's not like going into a tropical forest where look at an acre, and essentially every tree is a different species. We have only a handful of species that are in most of our Northwoods forests, and they're adapted to change. So that's a good thing. We can manage forests because they're already adapted. Plants and animals that live in them too are also adapted to change.
Good. Thanks, Ron. All right, here's the second question. Another true and false one for you. An increase in the number of wood-using industries in Wisconsin and increasing harvest levels threatens our forests. True or false? Wow.
You guys are good.
You guys are sharp. I think our job here is done, Ron. What do you think?
Well, I have to tell my little story. We're giving a talk on one of our Northwoods Land Trust preserves here a couple of years ago, and there was a group of nice people who were giving a little tour. It was a nice old hemlock white pine forest, and one of the visitors said, "Oh, did you hear the good news? The big mill at Wisconsin Rapid just closed. Hooray for our forests!" And we all said, "Oh, opposite, opposite. That's the worst news for our forest." And so you see the dichotomy of my comment on public information on the management and conservation of forests. That needs to be upped a lot.
So harvest levels over the last 10 years are down 10 to 20%. The number of timber industry production facilities have declined by 15 to 20%. The number of pulp and paper and products and paper manufacturing establishments down by 15 to 20%. I think you all likely heard in the news the Alstrom mill in Mosinee shutting down a portion of their paper production and shutting down their pulp mill. That's another significant hit to the markets for our timber producers. And all of that despite the fact that we are currently growing on an annual basis more than 2 times what we harvest. There's an amazing amount of mortality that's also happening that we're not able to get to for a variety of different reasons. So it might seem contradictory to some that harvesting timber as a renewable resource is really fundamental for forest conservation and keeping forests and forests. And I think, Ron, that was part of your story. But that really is a significant key. The foundation for the discussion is healthy forests. To have healthy forests, we have to have a healthy forest industry. If we have healthy forests and a healthy forest industry, we have healthy communities, the communities that are here in the Northwoods and spread across the state that rely on our forests and rely on our forest industry. And if we have all of that, we have a healthy state economy, we have healthy water resources, healthy air for us to breathe, healthy habitat for a variety of different wildlife species. So healthy forests, a healthy forest industry, healthy communities, and a healthy state economy, they go hand in hand. You can't separate them out. They all have to occur. And we're at a point right now, at least in my career, where our forest industry are in as much of a risk as our forests are. We continue to lose markets, and we're continuing to lose important portions of the supply chain that help move the forest products from the landowners to the mill. The number of loggers that we have out there is dwindling, and it's an aging workforce. It's a difficult profession, expensive profession to get into. There's been a lot of efforts here statewide with training programs and reaching out to students and others to help train workforce. It's going to need to be a continual, ongoing effort. And then the question comes up, well, why should we focus on workforce if we don't have an industry? So you see the circular situation that we're in. So commercial timber harvests, to emphasize this point, it's one of the best tools that a forest landowner or a forest manager has to assure that we have healthy forests.
Yeah, you bet. Just think of, many of you know, foresters know all this out there, but our oak forests, we have like 9 species of oak in Wisconsin, and all of those forests, oak forests, had their origin in full sun, in after fire events like that. And today, especially for the private landowners who own 40 or 80 acres, especially in the driftless area of southwest Wisconsin, in order to regenerate and manage those oak forests, you need a market for small wood, small diameter wood, to thin away the maples and basswoods and central hardwoods that are invading those forests. And because we don't have a market for small wood in that part of the state, we're converting our oak forests to other species, and they're so important for wildlife. Oaks are just a seminal species for wildlife.
Thanks, Ron. Oh, all right. Here's another question for you, another true or false. Wisconsin's forests in general are getting older. Wisconsin forests in general are getting older. Oh.
Nah, here we go.
We tripped them up on that one,
that
didn't we? I don't know. Is that a trick question? I'm not sure.
was
I think, Ron, did you say earlier that they were getting older?
Yeah,
I think you might have.
well,
True. The answer is true.
but old doesn't mean old growth at all. It means that ecologically the forests are a great bulk of the middle are 60 to 90 years old, something in that category. Look at the whole state. And, from maybe a pulpwood management, that's kind of old. But from an ecological standpoint, that's not old yet. What's really missing is the very, very young forest. We have barrens habitats in parts of the state. Specific plants and animals love those. They're really, really rare. Only 1% of historically are present. And the very, very old forest, old growth forest, older than 150 years, also only about 2%. But the middle is getting bigger and bigger and older. And the question is, what is going to be the trajectory in the future of those middle-aged forests.
So the 60 to 100-year-old age class is increasing while acreage of forests less than 40-year-olds is decreasing. And I think Ron alluded to the fact that the acreage of the forests older than 100 is decreasing. So maybe it was a little bit of a trick question, I'm not sure. So those old forests that are older than 100, that acreage is decreasing as well. The amount of forest with high conservation values and old growth remains extremely rare and at an extremely low percentage of the overall 17 million acres that's on the landscape. So the younger forests, the shade-intolerant species that require disturbance to regenerate, like aspen, white birch, jack pine, those forests are diminishing in acreage. How many people remember going back to probably the 80s, early 90s, vast forests of white birch? I can remember seeing those when it was just a solid wall of white birch. Do you see those anymore? Not much. If you do, great. You may see them along the sides of woods roads where there's been some disturbance or something along those lines. The same with jack pine, aspen a little bit different. But those younger, even-aged forests are declining.
Our wonderful birch forests, you know, what I always say is the reason we don't have birch forests, they need intensive disturbance. They need ground disturbance, fire, everything you can beat at them. They're susceptible to competition from other trees. They need full sun. So to make a birch forest is sort of like sausage. You know, you like the end, but you don't like how you get there. And
I was wondering where you were going with the sausage analogy there, Ron.
what kind?
Quick question. 25 years ago, we had the caterpillars come through with and knocked out the white birch.
I'll repeat it. Had the caterpillar invasion. Oh,
Yeah.
Is that a problem still?
Can you repeat his question, please?
Sure. So I think your question was relating to east. I think it's
Forest
east,
tent
east
forest
forest
caterpillar.
tent forest tent caterpillars.
Caterpillar,
Yeah, there's a couple different tent caterpillars, but yeah, forest tent caterpillars. I remember that going back to early '90s. Boy, if you were outside your house, it was challenging in some areas to even be outside. So I think that's a
periodic every 16, 20 years, something like that. You get these outbreaks. It's a native insect, defoliates. If it defoliates 1 year, the trees are usually healthy enough to refoliate. A couple of years, they get a little weaker and you know, other stresses. But just like spruce budworm in our balsam forest, it's a periodic native insect that comes around. Other native insects, though, are more of a problem. There's a couple of beetles that impact tamarack or larch forests, and they're native and they do their thing on tamarack. But with a much milder winter and longer snow-free seasons, they can have not one brood but 2 broods a year. And that's what's happening in all the western states with the mountain pine beetle. You know, if 1 brood is bad, but if they have 2 broods a year, they can just overwhelm them.
so the white birch story, just to circle back to that, as a real good example of how things kind of compound, and that was a little bit more of a natural occurring event. But the white birch forests across Wisconsin in the early 90s were, for the most part, reaching their maturity level. So being 50 to 60 to 70, 80 years old, that's about the point where white birch is going to start to decline. It's an even-aged, shorter-lived species requiring generally full sunlight and pretty specific soil conditions to regenerate. So that forest was reaching maturity. At the same time, if you remember back in the early 90s, we had some very dry years. So that put additional stress on the trees. And then we started to get some outbreaks of insects, and the outbreaks of insects compound if the trees are weakened because they can continue the populations to grow then at an accelerating rate. So we had all of those things come together more or less within a pretty tight time frame, and it really took a toll on the white birch. And while we were working diligently at the time to regenerate some of those forests as best we could, just couldn't get to all of the acreage. So we saw a lot of those a lot of those whiteburst forests just naturally convert to other more shade-tolerant species that were waiting to get into the site.
There was a small mill in Rhinelander for many years that used white birch exclusively. They made popsicle sticks out of it. And they're, of course, out of business now. No more white birch.
One more question, and I think, or do you want to
Well, I was
segue
just,
now? But
yes, I'll segue, and I will
Perfect.
ask that people who do have questions, raise your hand high, and Helen here will bring a microphone to you so all of our audience in-house and online can hear you. So raise your hand and she'll come find you. Okay, he's got one for you. Okay, did you have one more comment you wanted to make?
Go ahead. I'm ready for questions if folks have questions. You bet.
Tomorrow we're losing all of our snow cover. So is that going to put us at a higher risk for a longer fire season?
Short answer, likely. Yeah, so we've seen that, especially in portions of the state further to the south where snow cover has been not as common as it used to be. But anytime we have bare ground and we don't have green up, we're going to see increased fire risk.
I have to put my, my little note about fire. There's a ton of really good effort to put out wildfires. And we in the wildlife field wish there was a little more effort to do prescribed fires on all the state agencies. Again, literally half the state, the forests of half the state, at pre-settlement time in the 1830s, were dominated by fire. All the oak forests, all the aspen and jack pine forests that we had fire. And for example, DNR burns maybe 35,000 acres a year in prescribed fire, but not much in forest. Most of it's grassland and wetlands. 17 million acres of forest, maybe 8 million could be helped by some prescribed fire. This is understory fires, burning away competition, preparing seed beds. But at the tiny amount we burn on public lands throughout the state, it's just not going to make any difference. So we have to have other means to get where we're going, and that's where the timber industry comes in.
Ron and Tom, first of all, I appreciate you guys being here tonight. This is a great bit of information that I think is important. This is a two-part question. The first part, you mentioned earlier that 1% to 2% of state lands are virgin forests, and I believe a variety of those virgin forests are on state, county, and federal lands. And I'm just wondering about the risk of those being logged, because I think it's really an important part of our forest story. And the second part of the question is, Tom, what beer are you drinking?
You want to tackle the legitimate one
the
first?
small percentage of forests that are currently over 150 years old are on public lands, but which is not much. I think the last time we did a DNR report that I remember, maybe 10 years ago, it was something like 250,000 acres that are either that way or managed that way, 250,000. Many of these tracts are just small tracts, 5 acres, 10 acres, something like that. The only extensive, very mature forest with many old growth characteristics, of course, the Menominee Nation and their reservation. But it's actively managed forest. So the problem with these little patches of old growth is, they're so few and they're so scattered that windstorms and disease outbreaks or something can just wipe them out. So many people think that we should up from like 1 or 2% of truly forest mats for old growth to maybe up to 5% of the state's forest, 10%. So there are a lot of advocates for moving some of our 90-year-old forests into forest what we call old growth characteristics. So larger trees, lots of snags, coarse woody debris, lots of layers of vegetation. So that's an ongoing discussion.
Good. Thanks, Ron. Well, at the risk of driving this conversation into the weeds where maybe we don't need to, I'm a big hazy IPA fan, thanks. And these are some of the best, just my opinion.
I think we all know that the two driving engines that run our economy in northern Wisconsin are the tourist industry and the forestry industry, forest products industry, I should be more specifically. Ron, you earlier mentioned a man named Fred Clark, who was executive director of Greenfire, and who, a non-political organization, who started you in a committee to look at problems associated with northern forests. I just want to point out to this group that Fred, a friend of mine, is running for House of Representatives.
Yes.
He is, and he is seeking the open seat of the seat previously occupied by Tom Tiffany. And I just want to bring that up because, folks, when we go and visit the ballot box this fall, think about that fact that we could have a forester in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Hello. I'll preface this with the fact that I work for a forest carbon offset project developer, but curious your takes, both of yours, on, given that we have a growth to removals ratio of over 2 to 1, and forest carbon offset projects oftentimes extend rotation ages. Are carbon markets good for Wisconsin's forests or not?
So I think the way I look at that is any means for forest land owners to offset costs and keep their forest land as productive forest land is good. So if it's carbon, great. If it's a different product that can be realized and help defray the economic costs that are associated with keeping forests as forest, great. If it's a conservation easement, great. Anything that allows our forest landowners to have a reason to keep their forests as forest, I would say that's a benefit. That's a positive.
Yeah, definitely. There really has to be a good reason throughout the state for people to own forest land. And a lot of it is recreation. For the 3 million acres that are in the managed forest program, managed forest law, where landowners get a tax break for doing forest management with a plan on their property, you know, the number one reason they say they own that land is wildlife habitat and recreation, going hunting. And so we really need a reason for landowners to own forest, especially large landowners, the big 10,000 plus landowners. They could well convert that land to tiny little pieces instead of big tracts of land. If you have little tiny 40s and 20 acres, it's almost impossible for commercial timber harvest these days in many parts of the state, and to actively manage and do good things to those forests. And for many wildlife species, you need big tracts of land, big 100,000 acre tracts of can be managed forest, managed in all different age classes. If you ever want moose or our wolf population and even white-tailed deer, a lot of animals really need those big tracts. So if carbon is a reason to have big tracts of forest, just because you manage for carbon doesn't mean you're not managing for other products too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hello. I wanted to, I'm way back here.
Thank you for that.
First of all, I really appreciated your article, Forests at Risks. I have shared it probably 100 times, so I'm really grateful for that. It brought to my attention the top 10 list, and curious, it was noted in that article just briefly about fungal diversity. and wondering if there's been any consideration for partnerships or exploring how important the vital mycorrhizal network does to support the vitality of our forests here, protect and create buffers, but then also like bolster up our trees to be able to fight off against pathogens and invasive species. And I've got a question for you. How many species of mushrooms do you think exist in the state of Wisconsin?
I have no clue. But I would advise people for like $25, I think you can join Wisconsin Mycological Society. And you get all their information about mushrooms, and they have forays going out and looking at mushrooms. So if you're interested in mushrooms, $25 you can join that organization and really learn about mushrooms. The management
$25 for the whole family.
There you go. But the deal with mycorrhizae and fungus is if we have throughout the state, you know, a good percentage of our forests that are in the middle-aged or older age classes, you know, we'll be okay with fungus. So you can't have the whole state, you know, 10-year-old forest and repeat 10 years old all the time. That's a problem. But the ecology and the management of all the mushrooms go hand in hand with the management of things like coarse woody debris, snags and dead trees, large trees, for old growth characteristics that we manage for in some of our forests.
Okay, so you talked about how the market is declining for logging, especially that smaller stuff. So I'm wondering if you have any perspective on what's being discussed at the state level in regards to a facility in Hayward that would convert logs to like jet fuel. If you think that's a viable and smart thing to do. And I'm also just curious why the market has declined so much.
Let's see how much time we got here.
This has been debated over the last year or so. There's been webinars, and the University of Wisconsin and Madison scientists have put in information. We have information from the companies that want to produce it's called SAF, and it's not the Society of American Foresters. It's the Sustainable Aviation Fuel. And the idea is because we have abundant forest growth in Wisconsin, there's possibly a market in Europe for sustainable aviation fuel. So the European Union wants a lot of green things and climate things in their economy. And so investors are looking at a project at Hayward to see if it's possible to convert forest waste, the small branches, you know, sawdust, things like that. It can't be a mix of agricultural waste. It's got to be forest stuff. To make it in Hayward, make the aviation fuel, and then they'd have to truck it or get it to Duluth to put it on a boat to get to Europe, or in the wintertime, put it on a train to get to the East Coast to get it to Europe. So that's in the works.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. So it's been an interesting discussion here in Wisconsin over the last several months when a bill was introduced to help financially support that startup in Hayward. There were a lot of questions. SAF, or Sustainable Aviation Fuel, is new. It's a new process. There were a lot of questions about what it would mean to our existing industry, competition for the fiber. Certainly a lot of pros with regards to what it would bring to the local community for economic benefits. The Council on Forestry, which I chair, has been on record as a proponent of the project, recognizing that it would be another market for low-grade wood and wood fiber, which is desperately needed for us to be able to sustainably manage our forests. So we'll see where that goes. If they are successful in getting that off the ground, I think it will be a little while before we actually see markets open up for wood fiber. At the very best right now, all we would gain would be what we lost from the Alstrom closure. So we're just kind of back to square one if that does get up and running. With regards to why the industry is struggling, I think there's a number of factors. Regional competition, global competition, change in consumer demand and products. Costs are escalating. Some of the mills in the Lake States and other parts of the country are older. If you think back to the heyday of pulp and paper in Wisconsin, that goes back several years. So some of that equipment is just simply outdated and no longer can be run efficiently and effectively. On the positive side of things, we have seen mills in the Lake States start to change, retrofit equipment to start to produce new products. Wisconsin is still the #1 paper producing state in the nation. We're going to do everything we can to try to hang on to that. And that's part of the discussion here is how do we do that? How do we assure that that fiber is available and that it's available economically and feasibly for the mills that we do have here? And how can we attract new businesses like SAF, for example, to help better develop and diversify our forest products industry going forward?
All right, our next question is from online. We have, what plant species are affected by the overpopulation of deer, and what would you recommend?
There's another one where we have how much time we have, right?
One wildlife biologist said, just kill as many deer as you can every year. But no, deer seriously are a serious problem. They particularly like the lily family. So you can imagine all of the lilies, the Solomon seal, and those species can be just wiped out. Right at Rhinelander, we have Nicolay College, and they have about 10 acres or so of a hardwood forest that you can drive a road around. And we've hiked there since we moved to Rhinelander in 1974. In 1974-5, in the spring, the bottom was just a solid trilliums, just solid. Today, the only ones you can find, it takes about 10 years for it to get trillium to get this big and blossom, and they're just little shoots. There are no trilliums in there anymore. I live a mile away, the same with my land and my hardwoods. We bought the land, it's trilliums like crazy, they're gone. So there are some sensitive species of understory plants, many that the deer eat, and then, of course, tree species, heavy browse, things like if you're trying to grow white birch or red oak sprouts, or they love aspen, but usually aspen can get above them because their clear cuts have so many stems in it. Hemlock, Canada yew, yellow birch. So there are places in Wisconsin where landowners, private landowners, cannot regenerate their forests. They cannot grow new trees because deer just completely wipe them out. Zaki County and places like that. We've heard people say that. So it's a real problem. And of course, deer management is, you think forestry is complex, and that is really, really complex. Our system here in Wisconsin of deer management, deer population goals, deer harvest is ever changing. It's a mixture between the hunters organizations, the State Department of Natural Resources, and the legislature constantly going back and forth. And there's no solution that I can see at this point. There are too many deer in the state for hunters to harvest in the southern part of the state. Exclude the Northwoods. Southern farm country, there are just too many deer for hunters to harvest. And even if you give each hunter like 3 tags or 4 tags, they don't want to shoot that many deer. They want to maybe shoot 2. And so and hunters are declining, deer hunters like crazy. They're aging out just like the loggers are, and there's nobody to replace them. So I'm not sure. I don't know of an answer to the overpopulation of deer because of the hunting community, the DNR, wildlife management, and the legislature all pointing at each other and not coming to a solution.
So one of the other compounding problems with this is that deer don't like invasive species.
Yeah.
They like tree seedlings. I mean, they have evolved to eat trees, right? And our tree species, and that's what they prefer. So when we get into a situation when we have an invasive species in the understory and we have a high deer population, the trees are the first to go, the invasive species take over, and then it's really hard to get the trees back on the ground again.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of emphasis back here.
There we go.
A lot of emphasis is placed on the importance of old growth. I was hoping that you guys could speak a little bit more on the importance, especially the ecological importance of young successional forests, especially for species like neotropical migratory birds or popular hunting game bird species.
Yeah, absolutely correct. As I said, there are 350 species, just looking at the terrestrial vertebrates, those things that have a backbone. So birds, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. Those animals are adapted to all the different successional stages in Wisconsin to keep their populations up. So some need almost no trees, barrens type habitat, sharp-tailed grouse, and all the associated plants and insects that live in that community. And at the other end of the spectrum, there are many species that require what's called old growth characteristics. So you could have managed forest with old growth characteristics, large trees, coarse woody debris, different layers of vegetation in the forest. And so to manage all of the species, you know, the 350 vertebrates backed up by tens of thousands of insects, you know, maybe 3,000-4,000 species of plants that grow in forests. And all of those things, the plants and animals as a whole, each one is adapted to a certain successional stage in forests. So they're all important. The clear cuts are just as important as managing for old growth characteristics. I might say that, adding to what I just said while we're waiting for a question, is unfortunately, especially for many of those terrestrial vertebrates, there's only a few that are really common, like deer, robins, eagles around here, you know, they're pretty common. The great bulk of the species are either uncommon or rare. And so that's where we get into trouble. You know, you can't write a management plan for each rare species. Okay, they need this kind of forest in particular. And so the best thing to do, the most efficient thing to do, is to manage across our private and public lands all the different successional stages. So those rare species have a place to exist.
Hello, my question is this. I was stupid enough to move away from here for a few years, way back, get rid of some snow, and I went down to the Ozarks, and I became the fire chief down there. And the Ozark Mountains got some of the most beautiful forests that I have ever seen. But what they do is prescribed burnings every 2 to 3 years, and they cut down the dead trees ahead of the fire, and they clean up all of the tinder that causes forest fires. And I don't remember seeing any of that happening up here. And that made the forest so beautiful to walk through, and the little saplings popped up, and the deer just loved them. And so I was just wondering, why does not Wisconsin use that type of control over their forests?
Well, I think many managers certainly you're correct. Missouri has they have great funding for doing these kinds of things in their natural resources department there. Wisconsin would like to do that. And on public lands, the State Department of Natural Resources, Division of Forestry has the wherewithal. But the legislature is stingy. And it doesn't fully fund the Division of Forestry and all the people they need to do what's needed on the state lands. So this would include state natural areas and state wildlife areas and state forests and the county forest system. We do need staff and funding, if we're going to do a prescribed fire, to have people on the payroll that think about that all the time. Other groups like the Nature Conservancy, they do a lot of burning, and other private conservation groups do some burning, but it's staff and funding.
Back here. Yeah, as far as forest products go, what would you say maple syruping is impacts that as far as pros and cons?
Maple syruping?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's another product that we can derive from our forest, which kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about any renewable resource product that we can derive from our forest that provides a reason for us to keep forest is viable. You know, certainly the taps have some impact on those trees for sawn boards and other products going forward, but I think if you were to actually do the economic analysis on that individual tree itself, the sap that it produces and the syrup that it produces, you know, may balance out the value of that tree had it been cut down and sawn into a board. So, I think it's a product that it's a renewable resource that has a variety of different opportunities for landowners to manage at a variety of different scales. So, yeah, I see it as another positive use of our forests in Wisconsin. You bet.
Is it running now? Is anybody working on it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Should be doing good, eh?
Until it's
Question way back here. This may not be in your wheelhouse, so I apologize if it's not something that you can speak to, but when you were talking about the diminishing logging that's going on and that's how that's affecting the, you know, economy in the state, I'm wondering if you're hearing anything about what would potentially replace that. So something like ecotourism. Are there things that are coming in to fill in that gap?
Well, I think I couldn't point you to a specific example of what I would know at this point. I think a lot of that kind of goes back to our communities and our rural communities and our entrepreneurs to, again, diversify our economy and diversify the economic reasons on why we should keep our forests as forests. And certainly ecotourism, silent sports. I think we heard earlier the value of tourism to the Northwoods. It all goes hand in hand. And whether we're diversifying the composition of our forests or whether we're diversifying our local economies here for our communities in the Northwoods, I think anything we can do just helps us weather the more difficult times. Resilience is a function of diversity, and diversity minimizes risk. So anything we can do along those lines.
I don't know about.
Sorry, I muted the wrong one. Who's good?
Okay. I don't know about ecotourism, but certainly you used the phrase outdoor recreation, which includes ecotourism or coming, is, you know, just right up to with forestry for us in the Northwoods here. And whatever we can do along those lines. Just reading recently the Northwoods bicycle trail from Mercer to St. Germain. It's like millions and millions of dollars a year to the local economy from those bicycles. If you looked at the Boulder Junction tourism thing, they have a list of state natural areas to visit. You know, if you're coming, what can you do in Boulder Junction? Well, go visit a state natural area. There's a whole bunch of them on the state forest in the Boulder Junction area. So those kind of things are really, really important.
None of those are exclusive of one or the other. This is a situation where we can figure out how to have our cake and eat it as well. We can have ecotourism, we can have silent sports, we can have tourism and recreation, and we can have sustainable forest management and the timber products industry. It all works together. It can all work together. So that's the good news. We don't have to choose one against the other.
Yep. And you know, as I started out by saying that, you know, Wisconsin Green Fire is a science-based organization, and we promote, you know, using the best possible science or information to manage natural resources. And we all know that certainly at the federal level, there is a war on science going on. There's no question about it. So that's a real concern. For the Forest Service, losing staff and scientists, the forest research stations, the one in Rhinelander normally had 22 scientists and their staff working at the Rhinelander Forest Sciences Lab, does research on all kinds of forests. And now they're down to 9 people and have a hiring freeze. Grand Rapids, Minnesota station, I think they're down to 2 people now. They're just, the federal level want to get rid of scientists of all sorts. And research is really, really an important part of all of forest management. It tells us how best way to manage forests for commodities, for wildlife, for habitat, for water quality, all the things that are important in forests. So I think my biggest message from today is because of my work with Green Fire, we need to keep the science in our communities.
You mentioned earlier how it was hard for the southern tree species to get up here fast enough, and they'd have to jump over the central sands, which is impossible. Are you doing anything on state or federal land to plant species like shagbark hickory that can jumpstart the transition?
Sure.
To replace the trees that are going to disappear?
Assisted migration. Yeah, absolutely. I think our foresters, state, public, private, are well aware of the need to start looking at transitioning and assisting that migration, especially in those kind of tension zone areas and on those sites where we're kind of in between. And if there's a planting opportunity, I think it's pretty common, from what I've been seeing, to have a discussion about, okay, do we want to go with what's there now, or do we want to lean a little bit more towards what we think the climate might be going forward? Of course, that's a little bit of a gamble, right? Because we're saying, okay, it is going to be warmer, but right now I think my perspective is climate is just more variable. That's the big issue for us right now.
Is the tension zone moving north?
I don't know if I know enough information on that.
I don't know.
Is the tension zone, the zone across Wisconsin where it's, above that it's more northern oriented species, above that it's more of plants and animals, and south of that it's more southerly oriented. And there's a zone in the middle where they mix. And the question is that zone where they're mixing moving south? And I haven't heard. I know, though, on assisted migration, the state DNR, Division of Forestry, has a geneticist on staff now that's looking at that particularly and doing trials, seeing what kind, if you want to move white pine from south to north or different oaks or what species, you need to know the genetics of those species. Will they survive? And they're doing trials. If you move it and plant it, what happens and what's the genetics? So they're working on it. More staff and funding would make it go faster.
All right, we have another online question here. You said earlier that it's a problem that the value of land exceeds the value of the timber on it. Why is that a bad thing? Surely this aids conservation.
Well, there's, if you own 40 acres in Vilas County here, and you say, I want to keep it as forest, but your property taxes is through the roof, and say, okay, I'm going to manage the timber and do some selective cutting and get some value, and I can pay the taxes and have it for recreation. But a realtor comes along and says, I can give you $2 million for that 40. It has a little acreage on it that gets developed. Or larger corporations who own land. Should they own land that manages for forest products and all the plants and animals that live in those forests? Or maybe, around the country, maybe a mine is a better idea. Or, convert to agriculture and get rid of the forest. So those are all considerations. I know I work I'm on the board of the Northwoods Land Trust, and we've seen properties that are just off the scale, expensive. We can't afford to even look at them. Foresters 30 years ago would know if 40's for sale, they would buy it up and harvest the timber. and make some money on that 40 and maybe sell it to another landowner. And these days, the value of the pulpwood on many of our forests are the same as it was 30 years ago in Wisconsin, because the nearest mill is 100 miles away. You can't do it. So it really does work out that land values impact what happens, with forests.
One more question.
As a private woodland owner and a part of the managed forest program, I'm seeing our land being gradually taken over by balsam fir, which I don't see much of a market for or benefit to wildlife, and I would like to see it eliminated on our property. Am I being misguided?
No, not at all. Balsam fir with balsam fir is the thing I always say, it'll always be with us. It's always kind of there. You do harvest, it wants to come back, and it can be dense. Unfortunately, for trees that are harvestable, there's just a limited market. Unfortunately, Mosinee was one of the plants that actually took balsam fir, and those, it's 2 of their machines have just shut down. So the market is the problem. I know landowners who get out there with their chainsaw and try to do, but it's just a quagmire.
Yeah. Balsam's going to be a more shade-tolerant species than likely what's there right now. So as that canopy in the existing forest starts to break down, unless there's a disturbance to encourage regeneration of those more shade-intolerant species, you're going to get a natural evolution towards the more shade-tolerant species, which balsam is one. So it takes active management, some type of disturbance, fire in a natural setting, or a harvest or something like that to kind of redirect nature in the direction that you want it to go versus the direction it wants to take.
And the deer eat everything else and leave that
Yeah, and unless you plant your balsam for Christmas trees, then they love it.
Yeah.
We'll wrap up with one more online question here. Can you compare how forest management practices differ? Specifically, how the Menominee manages their forests versus U.S. Forest Service versus state forests?
Well, Menominee started out with an almost untouched old-growth forest, and the Forest Service started out with 0 trees in the big cutover. So that's the main difference. The Menominees can do a good job of selectively managing their forest and still have a nice, beautiful, mature forest. Where the Forest Service has to grow the trees beyond 90 years old to even start to catch up with what Menominee has. So I always thought, 50 years from now, you look at an aerial photo, here's the Menominee, the forest is this tall and dense, and now the forest on the Dacian National Forest is this big. 50, 60 years from now, you just wonder what it'll be, what it will look like. It all depends on what you do with those 90-year-old forests.
Well, thank you very much to Ron and Tom. Thank you to everybody who participated tonight, and to our sponsors, Lakeland Chapter of the UW Alumni Association, Rocky Reef Brewing, Minocqua Public Library, UW Kemp Natural Resources Station, UW Trout Station, WXPR Radio, and Brittingham Fund. We hope to see you all back here on April 2nd, where we'll be hearing from Jeff Wilson, all things wildlife. And if you'd like to stay informed, you can sign up through our website for our emails that come out. Have a good night.